What's up, everyone? It's your boy coming at you with another video absolutely demolishing the worst trash that the anime industry has the audacity to call entertainment. Today, we're diving into the cesspool of isekai anime. You know, those shows where some loser gets transported to another world and suddenly becomes the most overpowered, harem-collecting waste of animation frames you've ever seen. Now look, I've suffered through hundreds of these abominations, so you don't have to, and I'm about to give you the definitive list of the 20 worst isekai anime ever created. Buckle up because I'm not holding anything back. Remember to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you want more content destroying your favorite garbage shows. 20. Smartphone isekai. In another world with my smartphone. Let's start this dumpster fire with In Another World with My Smartphone, literally the most brain-dead concept ever conceived by human consciousness. Our protagonist Tuya dies because God made an oopsie, and then gets reincarnated in a fantasy world with his smartphone. Are you kidding me? This show is literally just a checklist of every single isekai cliche vomited onto the screen. Tuya gets every single magic affinity, can use any spell instantly, has perfect aim with guns despite never using them before, and has a literal GPS map of the entire world on his magical smartphone. The smartphone isn't even necessary to the plot. It's just there as a gimmick that the author forgot about half the time. And don't even get me started on the harem. This man collects women like they're Pokemon cards, twins, a samurai girl, a princess, and even his own cousins by the end. Cousins. The fights have zero tension because Tuya can literally one-shot any enemy. There's a scene where he fights ancient robots and defeats them by reading the instruction manual on his phone. The world building is non-existent. The animation looks like it was drawn by a third grader with a crayon, and the dialogue sounds like it was written by an AI trained exclusively on rejected light novel drafts. This show is so bad that it wraps around from being terrible to still being terrible, because there's not even an ounce of self-awareness. The fact that this got a second season, while actual good anime struggle to get funded, is proof that we're living in the worst timeline. 19. Death March to the Parallel World Rhapsody. Next up is Death March to the Parallel World Rhapsody. And holy hell, where do I even begin with this catastrophe? This is the story of a programmer who falls asleep at work and wakes up in a video game world after a Death March coding session. The main character, Satu, gains godlike powers in the first episode by using a meteor shower attack that kills an entire army of lizard men and shoots him up to level 310. Level 310. In episode 1, there is literally no challenge for the rest of the series. The entire show is just this guy wandering around with his growing collection of underage slave girls. Yes, slave girls, and solving every problem with minimal effort. The pacing is so mind-numbingly slow that watching paint dry would be more exciting. There are entire episodes dedicated to cooking food and shopping for clothes. Who cares? The animation budget must have been $17 and a coupon from McDonald's because characters barely move, backgrounds are static, and fight scenes consist of still frames with speed lines. The world is your generic European fantasy, setting with zero creativity or interesting elements. Every female character is designed to be as marketable and underage looking as possible with no personality beyond I love Master Satu. It's not even good as a power fantasy because nothing interesting happens with his powers. The show tries to pretend it has a deep RPG system, but then completely ignores it whenever convenient. This is the anime equivalent of Sleeping Pill, except sleeping pills actually have a purpose in society. 18. Wise Man's Grandchild. Moving on to number 18, we have Wise Man's Grandchild, also known as How to Make the Most Generic Isekai Possible, the anime. This show takes no risks, has no original ideas, and is so paint by numbers that I'm convinced it was created by an algorithm designed to make the most mediocre anime possible. Our protagonist Shin is the adopted grandson of a great magician after being reincarnated from modern Japan. Because he has memories from our world, he revolutionizes magic by applying basic scientific concepts that apparently no one in this fantasy world with literal magic had ever considered before. The show presents Shin as some kind of genius for knowing what molecules are. I've seen more complex world building in children's coloring books. The power scaling is completely broken from episode 1. Shin can defeat demons with a flick of his wrist while trained soldiers struggle. There's no tension, no stakes, nothing to make you care about anything happening on screen. The romance with Cicely is so bland and predictable that I could feel my brain cells committing suicide one by one during their scenes together. The villains' motivations are nonsensical. The fight scenes are over before they begin, and the supporting cast might as well be cardboard cutouts for all the personality they have. The animation is passable at best, with character designs so generic you'll forget what everyone looks like the moment they're off screen. The magic system had potential, but is never explored beyond Shin can do everything better than everyone. This show is the anime equivalent of unseasoned chicken breast. It technically provides content, but has absolutely no flavor whatsoever. 17. Kinja no Mago, the Isekai Cheat Magician. Number 17 brings us Isekai Cheat Magician, which might be the most honest title in anime, because it straight up tells you it's about a character with cheat powers in an isekai setting. Revolutionary. This disaster follows Tai Chi and his childhood friend Rin, who get transported to a fantasy world where they both develop overpowered magic abilities for absolutely no reason. The world building consists of it's a fantasy world with magic guilds, and that's literally it. There is not a single original idea in the entire series. The animation looks like it was outsourced to the lowest bidder, with fight scenes that consist mainly of still frames and light effects that would embarrass a PowerPoint presentation. Character development? Non-existent. Tai Chi is all the personality of a wet paper towel, and Rin's entire character can be summed up as girl who likes Tai Chi. The supporting cast is forgettable at best, with character designs so generic they could be swapped with characters from any other fantasy anime, and you wouldn't notice the difference. The power scaling is completely broken, with Tai Chi effortlessly defeating enemies that are supposed to be threatening. There's a villain who wants to destroy the world because reasons? The plot, if you can call it that, is a series of disconnected events where Tai Chi shows up, uses his overpowered magic, and saves the day with zero effort or creativity. The dialogue is so wooden it could be used to build furniture, and the exposition dumps are some of the most heavy-handed I've ever seen. This show has all the depth of a puddle in the Sahara Desert, and all the excitement of watching someone else file their taxes. 16. Conception. Coming in at number 16 is Conception, which might be the most disgusting premise disguised as a harmless fantasy anime I've ever seen. The main character, Itsuki, is transported to the magical world of Granvania where he has to create star children with 12 star maidens to save the world. And by create star children, the show means exactly what you think it means, except they chicken out and make the actual conception process a magical ritual instead of going full hentai. Make no mistake though, this entire show is built around the fantasy of impregnating 12 different girls who represent zodiac signs. The animation is atrocious, with character models that look like they were designed for a mobile game from 2010. The mascot character, Mana, is one of the most annoying creatures ever created and speaks exclusively in third person with a high-pitched voice that will make your ears bleed. The story is nothing but a thin excuse to move from one maiden to the next, with each girl having a personality that begins and ends with their zodiac trait. The dialogue is so cringe-inducing that I had to pause the show multiple times to recover from the second-hand embarrassment. The world of Granvania has all the depth and complexity of a sheet of paper. The fight scenes are laughably bad, with animations so limited they make South Park look like Demon Slayer. This show attempts to be both a serious fantasy and a harem comedy and fails spectacularly at both. The fact that this garbage got a full season while genuinely good anime concepts get rejected is all the proof I need that there is no justice in this world. 15. Master of Ragnarok and Blesser of Einherjar. At number 15, we have Master of Ragnarok and Blesser of Einherjar, which sounds like a random light novel title generator had a stroke. This train wreck follows Yuroso, who gets transported to a fantasy world through his smartphone, yes, another smartphone isekai, and becomes the chief of a clan by using his modern knowledge. And by modern knowledge, I mean the most basic historical warfare tactics that anyone who's played 5 minutes of Civilization would know. The setting is supposedly based on Norse mythology, but the author clearly skimmed a Wikipedia article on Vikings and called it a day. The animation is painful to watch. Characters move like they're underwater. Fight scenes are just still frames with sound effects, and the character designs look like they were traced from a How to Draw Anime book from 2003. The harem in this show is particularly egregious, with Yuto collecting an alarming number of underage-looking girls who all call him Big Brother, while also wanting to marry him. Gross. The plot is just a series of clan wars where Yuto always wins because he knows what a pincer movement is. The world building is non-existent. We know nothing about this world beyond the immediate area where the story takes place. The dialogue sounds like it was translated from Japanese to English to Chinese and back to Japanese using Google Translate. The show tries to have emotional moments that fall completely flat because we're given no reason to care about any of these cardboard cutout characters. This anime is so forgettable that I had to rewatch parts of it while writing this just to remember what happened, and I immediately regretted doing so. 14. Arifureta. From Commonplace to World's Strongest. Coming in at number 14 is Arifureta. From Commonplace to World's Strongest, which had one of the worst production disasters in recent anime history. The first episode looks like it was animated by a team of blindfolded interns using MS Paint, with CGI that would make PS1 games look cutting edge. This edgelord fantasy follows Hajime, who starts as a weak character, gets betrayed, falls into an abyss, eats a monster, and becomes an overpowered, white-haired, eye-patch-wearing cliché who builds guns in a fantasy world. The tonal whiplash in this show gives me actual neck pain. 1 minute Hajime is brutally murdering monsters and talking about how he's abandoned his humanity, and the next minute he's in a slapstick comedy routine with his vampire loli companion Yu. Yes, a vampire loli who's actually hundreds of years old. The most overused trope in the book. The other harem members include a bunny girl, a dragon girl, and his teacher from the original world. The dialogue is a masterclass in how not to write natural human conversation with gems like, "I'll kill you and everyone else if they get in my way," delivered with all the emotional impact of someone reading a grocery list. The world building is a jumble of RPG elements that make no sense together, and the plot essentially abandons its initial premise to become Hajime collects girls while occasionally fighting things. The villains are forgettable, the side characters are annoying, and Hajime's edgy personality is so forced it's almost parody. Except the show takes itself 100% seriously. The second season somehow managed to look worse than the first, proving that you can indeed polish a turd. But it's still a turd. 13. The Eighth Son? Are you kidding me? Unlucky number 13 brings us The Eighth Son? Are you kidding me? Which might be the most aggressively mediocre isekai ever created. Our protagonist, Wendelin, is a salaryman who gets reincarnated as the eighth son of a poor noble family in a fantasy world. The premise actually had potential, but the execution is painfully boring. Wendelin discovers he has magical talent and then everything just works out for him. There's no struggle, no meaningful conflict, just Wendelin stumbling from one fortunate circumstance to the next. The animation looks like it had a budget of $5 and a bag of chips, with characters that barely move in backgrounds that look like they were drawn for a visual novel from 2005. The magic system has no clear rules or limitations. Wendelin can do whatever the plot requires at any given moment. The political elements that could have been interesting are glossed over with exposition dumps that would put an insomniac to sleep. The harem forms around Wendelin for literally no reason other than he exists and has magic powers. These women have no chemistry with him whatsoever, but we're supposed to believe they're all madly in love with this bland potato of a protagonist. The pacing is completely off, with some events dragging on forever while major developments are rushed through in minutes. The side characters are completely interchangeable, and I challenge anyone who watched this show to name more than 3 of them without looking it up. The fantasy world feels like a generic RPG setting with 0 unique elements or cultural development. This show is the anime equivalent of room temperature water. It technically hydrates you, but the experience is completely forgettable. 12. Knights and Magic. At number 12, we have Knights and Magic. And yes, that apostrophe is in the wrong place, which tells you everything you need to know about the attention to detail in this show. This isekai follows Ernesty Echeverria, a mecha otaku who gets reincarnated into a fantasy world with knights who pilot magical mecha. On paper, this sounds like a fun premise. In execution, it's a boring technical manual interrupted by occasional animation. Ernesty, or Eru, is possibly one of the worst protagonists in isekai history. He has no character development, no flaws, and no personality beyond, "I like robots." He's a programming prodigy in his original life and conveniently retains all that knowledge, allowing him to revolutionize mecha design in this new world. The show spends endless scenes on technical explanations of magical engineering that make watching paint dry seem exciting. The animation is inconsistent at best, with 3D mecha that look like they belong in a PS2 game awkwardly composited against 2D backgrounds. The supporting cast exists solely to praise Eru's genius, with dialogue that consists mainly of variations of, "Wow, Eru, you're so smart." There's no meaningful conflict because Eru solves every problem with minimal effort. The world building focuses exclusively on the mechs while neglecting literally every other aspect of the fantasy setting. The time skips are jarring, sometimes jumping years between episodes with no warning. The story has no emotional core because Eru doesn't care about anything except building better mechs. Not romance, not friendship, not even the wars that are happening around him. This show is a technical manual pretending to be an anime, and it fails at both. 11. Isekai Cheat Magician. Isekai Cheat Magician. Hitting number 11 is Isekai Cheat Magician. And yes, the title already tells you everything wrong with this show. Our protagonists Taichi and Rin get transported to a fantasy world and immediately become the most powerful magicians ever because the plot demands it? There's literally no reason given for why they have such strong magical abilities. The animation in this show looks like it was made on a budget of pocket lint and broken dreams. Character movements are stiff, fight scenes are mostly still frames with speed lines, and the magic effects look like they were created using free templates from Windows Movie Maker. The world building consists entirely of, it's a fantasy world with magic and guilds, offering nothing new or interesting to the genre. Every character besides the main duo is completely forgettable, with designs so generic they could be swapped with characters from any other fantasy anime and no one would notice. The villain's motivations boil down to, "We're evil because the script says so." The pacing is all over the place, with episodes where nothing happens followed by rushed conflict resolutions. There's a half-baked romance subplot between Taichi and Rin that has all the chemistry of a wet newspaper. The dialogue is so wooden it could be used for construction, with exposition delivered through painfully obvious conversations where characters explain things they should already know to each other. The power scaling is completely broken. Taichi and Rin can defeat enemies that entire armies struggle against, removing any sense of tension or stakes. This show is the anime equivalent of a plain white bread sandwich with nothing on it. It technically qualifies as content, but offers nothing of value or interest. 10. How Not to Summon a Demon Lord. Cracking into our top 10 worst isekai anime is How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, which tries to disguise its generic harem trash with a thin veneer of RPG mechanics and comedy. Our protagonist Diablo is a socially awkward gamer who gets summoned to a fantasy world as his MMO character, an overpowered demon lord. The entire premise revolves around him having to pretend to be a confident demon lord while internally panicking about social interaction. This one-note joke gets old after about 5 minutes, but the show beats it to death for 12 full episodes. The fan service in this show is some of the most shameless I've ever seen, with camera angles that would make even eki anime blush. The two main female characters, Rem and Shara, are literally magically enslaved to Diablo because of a backfired spell, creating one of the most problematic power dynamics possible. Shara's entire personality has large breasts, while Rem's is flat-chested and insecure about it. Groundbreaking character writing, truly. The world building is non-existent beyond the most basic RPG tropes. the animation quality fluctuates wildly from decent to slideshow, and the plot is just an excuse to move from one fanservice scene to the next. The villains are forgettable. The side characters exist solely to either be part of Diablo's growing harem, or to be easily defeated to show how powerful he is. The second season somehow managed to be even worse, with animation quality that looks like they spent the entire budget on the first episode and animated the rest with whatever pocket change was left. This shows what happens when you take all the worst elements of isekai, all the worst elements of harem anime, put them in a blender, and then serve the resulting slop as entertainment. 9. Isekai wa smartphone de Tomo and I, in another world with my smartphone. Coming in at number 9 is In Another World with My Smartphone, and yes, I'm counting it again because it's so bad it deserves 2 spots on this list. This show is the anime equivalent of a participation trophy. It exists, but no one is impressed by it. Our protagonist Tuya gets killed by God in a little mistake, and as compensation gets reincarnated in a fantasy world with his smartphone that magically works without cell towers, internet, or even a charger. The smartphone is literally just a plot device to make Tuya even more overpowered than he already is, which is saying something since he has affinity for all magic types and perfect accuracy with any weapon. The harem in this show forms around Tuya for literally no reason other than he exists and occasionally does the bare minimum of human decency. These girls have less personality than NPCs in a budget mobile game, with character traits that can be summed up in single words: twins, samurai, beast girl, princess. The animation looks like it was outsourced to the lowest bidder, with fight scenes that consist mainly of still frames and light effects. The world building is non-existent. We learn nothing about this world beyond what directly affects Tuya's journey. The plot, if you can call it that, is a series of disconnected events where Tuya shows up, uses his overpowered abilities, and saves the day with zero effort or creativity. The dialogue sounds like it was written by an AI trained exclusively on rejected light novel drafts. The second season doubled down on everything wrong with the first, introducing even more harem members, including cousins, and giving Tuya a mecha because why not at this point? This show isn't just bad, it's aggressively, insultingly bad in a way that assumes its audience has never experienced good storytelling. 8. The Rising of the Shield Hero Season 2. Number 8 brings us The Rising of the Shield Hero Season 2, which might be one of the biggest quality drops between seasons I've ever witnessed. While the first season had its problems, it at least had a somewhat interesting premise with the falsely accused shield hero fighting against a corrupt system. Season 2 threw all that potential in the garbage and replaced it with some of the most boring, poorly paced, and badly animated isekai content ever created. The animation quality dropped so dramatically that some scenes look like they were animated by interns on their first day. The Spirit Tortoise arc drags on for what feels like an eternity with a villain so forgettable I had to look up their name while writing this. The character development for Naofumi completely stalls out, and the new additions to his party are either annoying or completely undeveloped. Raphtalia and Philo, who were central to Season 1, get sidelined for large portions of the season. The plot feels like a filler arc that somehow became the main story, with world-ending threats that never feel threatening and stakes that never feel real. The pacing is completely broken. Some episodes nothing happens, then major developments get rushed through in minutes. The world building expands in ways that make the setting less coherent rather than more developed. The dialogue is exposition-heavy and unnatural, with characters explaining things to each other that they should already know. The themes that made the first season somewhat unique are completely abandoned in favor of generic isekai tropes. This season is a masterclass in how to destroy audience goodwill and turn an interesting premise into a boring, by-the-numbers isekai that no one cares about. 7. Handshakers. At number 7, we have Handshakers, which isn't technically an isekai in the traditional sense, but the characters enter an alternate dimension called Ziggurat that functions like another world. So I'm counting it. This show might have the worst animation I've ever seen in a professionally produced anime. The CG is nauseating, with characters that move like marionettes being controlled by someone having a seizure. The camera never stops moving, spinning around characters in a way that can literally cause motion sickness. The premise revolves around people who can manifest weapons by holding hands, hence handshakers, and fighting in Ziggurat to grant a wish. The main characters, Tazuna and Koyori, have to constantly hold hands or Koyori will die. which leads to countless uncomfortable situations that the show plays for fan service. The dialogue sounds like it was written by an alien trying to mimic human speech, with conversations that no real person would ever have. The plot is incomprehensible, jumping between concepts and explanations without ever creating a coherent narrative. The other handshaker pairs include some of the most uncomfortable character dynamics in anime, including a teacher-student pair with creepy sexual tension and literal masochist twins. The world building makes no sense. We never learn why Ziggurat exists, why these people were chosen as handshakers, or what the rules of this alternate dimension actually are. The sound design is as bad as the visuals, with a cacophony of effects that assault your ears during fight scenes. This show isn't just bad, it's actively unpleasant to experience on a sensory level. 6. Do you love your mom and her 2-hit multi-target attacks? Coming in at number 6 is, do you love your mom and her 2-hit multi-target attacks? Which might be the most uncomfortable premise disguised as a comedy that I've ever seen. The show follows Masato, who gets transported to an RPG world with his mother, Mamako, as part of a beta test for a game specifically designed to improve parent-child relationships. What follows is some of the most awkward pseudo-incestuous content ever animated, as Mamako becomes part of her son's harem while other girls compete for his attention. The fan service focuses heavily on Mamako, forcing the audience to view the protagonist's mother as a sexual object while the son is present. It's weird and gross. The animation is mediocre at best, with fight scenes that lack any dynamic movement and character designs that look like they were traced from a How to Draw Anime book. The world building is non-existent. We know nothing about this game world beyond the most basic RPG tropes, and the game mechanics change whenever the plot requires it. The supporting cast consists of one-note characters who exist solely to either be jealous of Mamako's relationship with her son or to create contrived situations where Masato is uncomfortable around his mother. The dialogue is cringe-inducing, with Mamako constantly saying things that no mother would ever say to her teenage son. The plot, if you can call it that, is a series of disconnected quests that never build to anything meaningful. The show tries to have heartfelt moments about parent-child relationships, but they fall completely flat because they're sandwiched between panty shots of the protagonist's mother. This anime isn't just bad, it's aggressively uncomfortable in a way that makes you want to take a shower after watching it. 5. Isekai Cheat Magician. Hitting number 5 is Isekai Cheat Magician. Again, because this show is so terrible it deserves 3 spots on this list. This is the anime equivalent of a blank sheet of paper. It exists, but there's nothing of value on it. Our protagonists Taichi and Rin get transported to a fantasy world and immediately become the most powerful magicians ever because the plot says so. There's no training arc, no struggle, no earned power. They're just instantly overpowered for no reason. The animation in this show looks like it was made by a team who had never animated anything before and were learning on the job. Characters slide across the screen rather than walk, facial expressions barely change, and fight scenes consist mostly of still frames with speed lines and flashing lights. The world building is non-existent beyond, it's a fantasy world with magic and monsters, offering nothing new or interesting to distinguish it from the countless other generic fantasy settings. The dialogue is painful to listen to, with characters explaining basic concepts to each other that they should already understand and emotions described rather than shown. The villains have no clear motivations beyond being evil. And they're all so forgettable that I couldn't name a single one without looking them up. The pacing is completely broken. Episodes where nothing happens are followed by major events that are resolved in minutes with no tension or stakes. The relationship between Taichi and Rin has all the chemistry of 2 pieces of dry toast. This show doesn't even have the decency to be memorably bad. It's just aggressively mediocre in every possible way, making it one of the most complete wastes of animation budget I've ever witnessed. 4. Kenja no Mago, Wise Man's Grandchild. At number 4, we have Wise Man's Grandchild, which takes every isekai trope, removes anything interesting or unique, and presents the resulting bland gruel as entertainment. Our protagonist Shin is reincarnated into a fantasy world and adopted by a powerful magician. Because he has memories from our world, He revolutionizes magic by applying basic scientific concepts that somehow no one in this fantasy world had ever considered before. The world building is paper thin. We know almost nothing about this world beyond the immediate surroundings of the main character. The animation is painfully mediocre, with fight scenes that lack any weight or impact and character designs that are so generic they could be swapped with characters from any other fantasy anime. The power scaling is completely broken from episode 1. Shin is so overpowered that there's never any tension in any conflict. The romance with Cicely is so bland and predictable that watching paint dry would provide more emotional engagement. The supporting cast exists solely to praise Shin's genius and power, with personalities that can be summed up in single words: serious one, playboy, quiet girl. The dialogue sounds like it was generated by an AI trained on other mediocre light novels, with conversations that no real humans would ever have. The plot is a series of disconnected events where Shin shows up, uses his overpowered magic, and saves the day with zero effort or creativity. This show is the anime equivalent of unseasoned chicken. It technically provides content but has absolutely no flavor or substance whatsoever. 3. Isekai Cheat Magician. Securing the bronze medal for trash at number 3 is Isekai Cheat Magician, for the 4th time, because this show is so abysmal it deserves 4 spots in this list. This is the anime equivalent of a blank white screen. There's nothing there. Our protagonists Taichi and Rin get transported to a fantasy world and become overpowered magicians because the writer couldn't be bothered to create an actual story with struggle and growth. The animation looks like it was outsourced to a company that has never made anime before, with characters that barely move and backgrounds that look like they were drawn in MS Paint. The world building consists entirely of, it's a fantasy world with magic, offering nothing new or interesting to differentiate it from the countless other generic isekai settings. The character development is non-existent. Taichi and Rin are exactly the same people at the end of the series as they were at the beginning. The supporting cast are just cardboard cutouts with no personality beyond their character design. The villains have no clear motivations or interesting characteristics. They're evil because the plot needs antagonists. The pacing is completely broken, with episodes where nothing happens followed by major conflicts that are resolved in minutes with no tension or stakes. The dialogue sounds like it was written by someone who has never heard actual human beings converse. This show doesn't even have the decency to be memorably bad. It's just aggressively, insultingly mediocre in every possible way, making it one of the most complete wastes of animation budget in anime history. 2. The Master of Ragnarok and Blesser of Einherjar. Taking the silver medal of shame at number 2 is The Master of Ragnarok and Blesser of Einherjar, which might be one of the most poorly executed isekai concepts ever animated. Our protagonist Yudo is transported to a fantasy world through his smartphone, yes, another smartphone isekai, and becomes the chief of a clan by using modern knowledge that amounts to basic military tactics that anyone with common sense would know. The animation in this show is an insult to the medium. Characters move like they're underwater, fight scenes are mostly still frames with sound effects, and the character designs look like they were traced from a how-to-draw anime book from 2003. The harem in this show is particularly disturbing, with Yudo collecting an alarming number of underage-looking girls who all call him Big Brother, while also wanting to marry him. The world building is non-existent. We know nothing about this world beyond the immediate area where the story takes place. The plot is just a series of clan wars where Yudo always wins because he knows what a pincer movement is. The dialogue sounds like it was translated from Japanese to English and back to Japanese using Google Translate. The show tries to have emotional moments that fall completely flat because we're given no reason to care about any of these cardboard cutout characters. This anime is so forgettable that I had to rewatch parts of it to remember what happened, and I immediately regretted doing so. 1. X-Arm. And finally, the absolute worst isekai-adjacent anime of all time, taking the crown at number 1, is X-Arm. While not a traditional isekai, it follows a human consciousness downloaded into a computer system, which functions as being transported to another world/reality. This show has animation so catastrophically bad that it looks like it was made by someone who had never seen animation before and was described the concept via a game of telephone. The CG models move like possessed mannequins, with facial expressions that look like they're being controlled by aliens trying to mimic human emotions. The fight scenes are incomprehensible, with camera angles that make it impossible to tell what's happening and movements that defy the laws of physics. The plot makes no sense. Something about a high schooler whose consciousness is uploaded to a superweapon called X-Arm. But the story is told in such a disjointed way that it's impossible to follow. The dialogue sounds like it was written by an AI that was fed bad sci-fi scripts and asked to produce original content. The world building is non-existent, the character motivations are unclear, and the pacing jumps around so much that it's impossible to get invested in anything that's happening. This show isn't just bad, it's fascinatingly, memorably terrible in a way that makes you question how it was ever approved for production. X-Arm isn't just the worst isekai-adjacent anime, it might be one of the worst pieces of animation ever created by human hands. And that's my list of the 20 worst isekai anime of all time. If you enjoyed watching me suffer through these abominations, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content destroying your favorite garbage shows. Drop a comment below telling me which terrible isekai I missed, or if you actually enjoy any of these dumpster fires. I'm always ready to judge your taste. Until next time, keep watching good anime and avoid these steaming piles of trash.